The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before your brain even catches up. 1 second you're just driving, maybe thinking about dinner or your next errand, and the next, your chest tightens. You glance down at your speed. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? Why me? You pull over, engine idling, hands suddenly feeling heavier than they should. The silence inside your car gets loud. Then the officer steps out of their vehicle, slow, deliberate, watching you. And right there, before anything is even said, the situation has already started to unfold in ways most drivers don't fully understand. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been pulled over and felt like the situation escalated for no clear reason? Like something small suddenly turned into something much bigger? If that's happened to you, I want you to share it in the comments. Seriously, your experience matters here, because later in this discussion I'm going to explain exactly why those situations spiral the way they do, and what most people miss in the moment. Now here's the part most people don't realize. A traffic stop is not just about a violation. It's a psychological interaction, a legal framework, and a power dynamic all happening at once. And sometimes when officers cross certain lines, intentionally or not, it doesn't just end with a warning or a ticket. It ends with lawsuits, settlements, cities writing checks, and those checks can be big. Let's walk through how that actually happens. When the officer approaches your car, they've already made several observations. They've watched how quickly you pulled over, whether you hesitated, whether your brake lights came on immediately or late. They've looked at your lane discipline. They've even noticed whether your car drifted slightly before stopping. By the time they reach your window, they're not just asking questions, they're testing reactions. Do you know why I pulled you over? That question is not casual, it's strategic. Most drivers treat it like small talk. It's not. It's an invitation to self-incriminate. And here's where things begin to go wrong. A lot of people respond with something like, "Yeah, I was probably going a little fast," even if they're not sure. Or worse, they start explaining everything. "I was late and I didn't see the sign and I just..." Now pause for a second. From your perspective, you're being cooperative. From the officer's perspective, you're building a case against yourself. But here's the deeper layer most people don't think about. Officers are trained to detect nervousness, but they're not always trained to distinguish between normal anxiety and suspicious behavior. And that gap is where problems begin. Because let's be honest, almost everyone is nervous during a traffic stop. Even if you've done nothing wrong, your heart rate goes up, your voice changes, your hands might shake. To an officer who's expecting deception, those normal reactions can look like something else. Now imagine this scenario. You hand over your license and registration. The officer takes them, glances briefly, and then asks another question. "Where are you coming from?" It seems harmless, casual, but legally it's not required for you to answer that. And this is where things get uncomfortable. If you answer, you open the door to more questions. Where are you headed? How long were you there? Who were you with? If you don't answer, the tone often shifts. So you don't want to answer my question? Now you're in a pressure moment. Silence suddenly feels suspicious. Cooperation feels risky. And most people don't know how to balance that. This is where many officers stay within legal boundaries, but some don't. There have been cases where officers prolong stops without clear justification, holding on to documents longer than necessary, repeating questions in slightly different ways, waiting for inconsistencies. And here's the key point. Time matters. A traffic stop is supposed to be limited in scope. It's not meant to become an open-ended investigation unless there's reasonable suspicion of something more. But what happens when that line gets blurred? Let's talk about a situation that has cost cities serious money. An officer pulls someone over for a minor violation, maybe a broken taillight, maybe a rolling stop. Instead of addressing that violation directly, the officer begins probing. "Mind if I take a look inside your vehicle?" The driver hesitates. That hesitation alone can trigger suspicion. "Why not? You got something to hide?" Now the pressure builds. If the driver says no, the officer might call for backup, maybe a canine unit. Now the stop stretches from minutes to potentially half an hour or more. If there's no valid legal basis for that extension, That's where things become legally dangerous for the department. Courts have repeatedly ruled that prolonging a stop without reasonable suspicion violates constitutional protections. And when that happens, it's not just about evidence being thrown out. It can turn into a civil rights lawsuit, and cities pay. Now let's make this more real. Picture this. You're sitting there, your document's still in the officer's hand. It's been 10 minutes, then 15. You haven't been told what's happening. You ask, "Am I free to go?" That question is powerful, but also uncomfortable. Most people don't ask it. They wait, they assume, they hope. But legally, that question forces clarity. If the officer says no, they need a reason. If they say yes, the stop should end. But here's where things sometimes go off track. Some officers respond with vague answers. "Just hang tight. Sit tight for me. I'll be right back." And the clock keeps ticking. In some real-world cases, this kind of delay, without proper justification, has been a key factor in lawsuits where individuals successfully argued their rights were violated. Now let's talk about another situation that escalates quickly. Step out of the vehicle. This command is legally allowed in most situations. Courts have upheld that officers can ask drivers to step out for safety reasons. But the way it's delivered matters. Tone changes everything. A calm request can feel manageable. A sharp command can feel threatening. And here's where drivers often make a mistake. They react emotionally. "Why do I have to get out? I didn't do anything wrong." Now understand something important. Even if you're legally correct, the roadside is not the place to argue that. Because from the officer's perspective, resistance, even verbal resistance, can escalate the situation. At the same time, there have been cases where officers go too far after the driver exits the vehicle. Unnecessary searches, physical handling without clear justification, commands that go beyond what's reasonable. And when those actions are captured on body cameras, dash cams, or even bystanders' phones, that's when things shift from a routine stop to a legal problem. And again, cities pay. Let's shift to passengers for a moment because this is another area where things get complicated. Passengers often think they're invisible in a traffic stop. They're not. Officers may ask them questions, request identification, observe their behavior closely. Now here's the nuance. Passengers generally have fewer obligations than drivers, but they're still part of the interaction. If a passenger starts speaking aggressively, challenging the officer, or making sudden movements, that can change the entire tone of the stop. On the other hand, there have been situations where officers overstep by detaining or searching passengers without proper legal grounds. Those cases have also led to legal consequences. Because the law doesn't just protect drivers, it protects everyone in that vehicle. Now let's talk about something subtle but incredibly important: how officers interpret behavior. Eye contact, tone of voice, hesitation, even how quickly you respond. All of these factors are being assessed in real time. If you answer too quickly, it might seem rehearsed. If you pause too long, it might seem deceptive. If your voice shakes, it might seem like guilt. But here's the truth. Most of these reactions are just human. The problem is, in the moment, they can be misinterpreted. And when misinterpretation leads to escalation, that's where things can go wrong. There have been cases where officers escalate based on perceived threats that weren't actually there. Commands become louder, movements become more forceful, backup arrives. What started as a minor stop now feels like a high-risk situation. And afterward, when everything is reviewed, video footage, audio recordings, timelines, that's when the question gets asked. Was this escalation justified? If the answer is no, that's when accountability comes into play. And accountability, in many cases, means financial consequences for the city. Now here's something that might surprise you. Sometimes, it's not the big dramatic moments that lead to lawsuits. It's the small, repeated violations. Holding someone longer than necessary, ignoring a request for silence, continuing to question after a clear refusal, conducting a search without proper consent or cause. Individually, these might seem minor, but together they form a pattern, and patterns are what courts look at. Now let's go back to something I hinted at earlier. the mistake most drivers don't realize they're making. It's not just what you say, it's how much you say. People think talking more helps, that explaining everything clears things up. But in reality, over-explaining often creates inconsistencies, small details that don't line up perfectly, statements that can be interpreted in multiple ways. And once there's inconsistency, suspicion grows. Now the officer has a reason, at least in their mind, to dig deeper. This is how simple stops become complicated, and sometimes it's not because the driver did something wrong, but because the interaction spiraled. Now let's flip the perspective for a moment. Officers are trained to stay alert, to assume uncertainty, to look for danger even when it's not obvious. From their point of view, every stop has unknown variables. They don't know who you are. They don't know what your intentions are. They don't know what's inside your vehicle. So they rely on patterns, behavior cues, experience. The problem is, those tools are not perfect. And when they're applied too aggressively or without proper limits, that's when rights get crossed. That's when stops go too far. And that's when cities start writing checks. Now imagine you're back in that car, blue lights still flashing behind you. The officer returns your documents. There's a pause. Just a warning today. Relief hits you immediately. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows. But here's the thing. What happened during those few minutes matters more than most people realize. Because every action, every question, every response, it all plays into a system that has real consequences. For you, for the officer, and sometimes for an entire city budget. And the next time those lights appear behind you, the situation won't feel so unpredictable. You'll notice the pauses, the questions, the tone shifts. You'll recognize when something feels routine and when something starts to go off track. And that awareness, that's what keeps a simple stop from turning into something much bigger.